Um, so anyways, what I wanted to talk to you all about, and I have a bunch of slides, but I'm going to go quickly through them so you can have a good conversation. It's very much a personal journey that I embarked about 2 years ago, and I think the first question sort of picks up a lot in the conversation that you guys were getting to, which is what is real? What exactly of what we're currently experiencing, even in this moment, how much of it is it real, or what we consider to be real? And it turns out that it's a lot less than we actually think. I don't know if any of you have seen this picture, but you kind of look at it and you kind of start to see as if it were a faded color picture. And when you zoom in, you realize that it's a black and white picture with color lines, and that your brain actually fills in the rest and starts to interpret and project color where there isn't, because that's what the brain is trying to do. It's a machine that is constantly trying to predict and make sense of an environment. I highly recommend this book if you guys are not familiar with it, that I think came out last year, called How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain. And it really goes very deep into the latest neuroscience in how emotions are created in the brain, and ultimately how neurologically and even physiologically we constantly create the reality around us. And what's interesting is she gives a bunch of examples. So she talks about a rainbow. And when you look at a rainbow, you tend to see these bands of color. But the reality is that it's a spectrum. And you see there is lighter and darker when you look at it in black and white, but when you go to color, you see these bands. And what the brain is actually doing is it's clustering everything that looks like red, and everything that doesn't. So you're actually projecting a band. So she goes so far as to say that color actually is a cultural construct. It's an idea that you have in your brain that you project on things. And there's this fascinating test that was done a while back. The Himba tribe is a tribe in Namibia that can't see the color blue because there isn't the color blue in their language. And they went out, a bunch of scientists, to test this. Now, it turns out that there are 58 words for green in their language. So all of the boxes that kind of look almost like the same green to us, they could detect every difference in those. But since we don't have those 58 words for green and that detection based on our life, we don't see it. And obviously, a lot of memory is visual, a huge component. And she even shows how neurologically, there's 10 times more neurological connections to the visual cortex from different parts of the brain than there actually are from the retina. So think about that for a second. There is way more information in your visual cortex that creates sense of the world than is actually coming into your eyes. And that is based on your past experience, that it's based on your education, your culture, and so this this idea that context and information is critical, because that's how the brain makes sense of stuff. So she talks about this control network that helps kind of predict and understand what the context is. So here you see your brain sort of fighting. Is the B a B or is it a 13? Well, it depends. If you give it the context of A and C, it's a B. If you give it the context of 12 and 14, it's a 13. So this is a very simple example of how context shapes content to a certain degree of how you understand. And when you apply that to belief systems, you get into the stage of, you can sort of question exactly what is the context that is creating a reality of how you're interpreting things. So I went into a fairly deep personal journey here about 3 years ago. And my big question is, what is actually real about turning 50? I turned 50 in 2018. And I asked myself, well, if a lot of these things are cultural context and things that I assume are real, maybe are not, what if I could re-engineer my mind, body, and soul for the next 50 years of life? So rather than thinking of midlife as an oh shit moment, it's actually a rebirth. Why? Well, it turns out that it's at this stage in life where the early onset of most chronic diseases happen. And I got married late, have two young kids, and I want to be around for a really long time and sort of dance like a monkey at their wedding. So I am a big believer that Plato was right, that we continue to confuse the shadows on the wall as reality, and that we have a tremendous amount of agency in changing a lot more of what we live and experience. So just to give you guys a little context, sort of rewinding the clock of how this journey started. I had founded a phenomenal virtual reality company in 2015-16. It was in Madrid, and we also had an office in LA. And obviously, when you're in the world of virtual reality, sort of the idea of perception and experience, you can start to test it in virtual worlds in really interesting ways. We had over 40 festival awards and selections. We were the first VR company to ever get selected at the Tribeca X Film Festival for branded content for a very surreal piece that we did. That's a Spanish chef called David Munoz, who's a Michelin star chef. And we just created this wacko, amazing experience for that. I even brought Freddy Krueger to Spain to shoot 2 horror episodes. When one of our productions, Variety sort of called it as absolutely breathtaking, an example of what storytelling could be. When you get to sort of sit at 4 a.m. in the middle of the Piazza San Marco, celebrating your successes, you feel like you're on top of the world. But we had very rough waters. We were about a year late in the VR funding cycle. And I knew that we were not going to make it. And I needed oxygen. I needed to take a break. I needed to just clear out. I knew we were going to have to shut down the company. It was painful and it was very stressful. And I said, you know what? I'm going to just go. I'd been doing the sort of the Wim Hof method for about 3 years. And then I came across this winter expedition. I decided that I wanted to climb a mountain half naked in shorts for no particular reason. I just felt called to do it. And standing at minus 25 degrees Celsius in shorts at the top of a mountain shifted my world dramatically. I suddenly realized, wait a second, I'm not cold. And I said, I know cold is a physical reality, but how can it be that I'm standing at these temperatures and I'm not cold at all? I'm fine. And I realized that cold, even though there is a physical reality, is an idea. You've got thermal sensors in your body that are sending information to your brain. And what we were trained to do, through the breath work and the mindset, is change the message. So we didn't feel cold, even though it was cold as hell out there. And we had this group of alpha males, and I was the oldest one there. And I said, you know what? I got to get rid of my belly. I want to see if I can get rid of my belly, because to me that was sort of like a symbol of a 50-year-old guy. And I assumed, that's what happens. Your body changes, your metabolism changes, and you have to deal with it. So came back, shut down the studio, which for me ended up being a huge success. I sort of, since I reframed cold, I reframed failure and I reframed success. We kicked ass for the company, but certain conditions weren't there. So rather than have it take me down, I said, I'm going to make this the best possible wind down, get everybody placed in companies, be as honorable as we can with all the vendors, good communication. And, we ended up doing a really fantastic job closing down the business. I've had other businesses that succeeded and others that have failed, and the failed ones have been very painful, but this time, it was wonderful. And 3 years later, 2.5 years later, we still have a WhatsApp group with 10 employees, and we're constantly chatting because there was so much love for what we did. And so I said, you know what, this was 2017, I'm going to take a quasi sabbatical. I have a couple other projects, but I don't want to be on full time. And rather than being in this doing mode, I want to be into this be mode. And in Iceland, in March, I went again for another sort of Wim Hof experience. And there I just said, here's my plan. I want to live to be 100. That's a decision I've made. And just making that decision made me feel like I have a lot more time. Obviously, I can't control if I live to 100 or not, but the idea that I will live that long made me realize, well, from 50 to 80, I have as much time as I had from the time I graduated from college to now. So what could I do with that time with the knowledge, the capital, the wisdom, the network, the learning that I have? And suddenly things got very exciting. The possibility to just reinvent things was amazing. So I wanted to start doing a little bit of a health check. My father had died of a heart attack in 2005. And we've been checking our hearts since then. I went to see the doctor, and the doctor said, look, your cholesterol is quite high. And in particular, the particle count is very, very high. And he said, I want you to take a statin. And I was like, wait a second. This is like, no, I'm supposed to live to 100. I shouldn't have, like, you know, heart conditions and all that stuff. But I did. And my question is, should I trust my doctor? I said, you know, if I'm not going to die of a heart attack in the next 3 to 6 months, I wanted to attack it from nutrition. And his response, this is due to your genes. Diet is not going to affect it. Well, I changed my diet, and in a month, I dropped my cholesterol, 30 to 35%. And that just blew me away. I said, how can it be that I could change my cholesterol just by changing what I was doing and doing a little bit more fitness? And I said, there's a lot of stuff that could be done. And I came across at that point, almost synchronistically, with a company called Mind Valley, and sort of a book that Vishen, the CEO, wrote called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind, that sort of really goes into, you know, how you can rewire and rebuild and re-engineer your life as you start to get out of different belief systems that you have. So I said, okay, here's my experiment. I'm going to be the architect of my life, and I'm going to see myself as an iPhone. My hardware is my body, obviously, physiology and neurology. My operating system is my beliefs, and the apps are the habits that I run. And with that, I just started on this journey exploring a bunch of different things. And my guiding principles were very simple. I believe that beliefs drive everything, and that's what creates reality. That if you have a purpose, it sticks. So I had a strong motivation because I wanted to get into a very healthy state for the future. It's all about the habits. It's the daily actions, the small actions that make it real. And I'm a big fan of minimum effective dose, and just try to find, you know, compressed, highly efficient ways to work different systems in the body. And I don't want to spend more than 5 to 30 minutes a day because I have other stuff to do. So even though it was a quasi sabbatical, I wasn't going to spend, you know, hours and hours and hours doing all sorts of things. And I just went through a huge amount of experimenting of different techniques and methods for body, mind, and soul. And as I started going into these, I realized, whoa, I had certain assumptions of how things had to be, to then realize that, no, you can actually change it. You can actually modify it. And I started with my death. And some of you might be familiar with this book by Bronnie, where she was a nurse, where she basically archived what were people's top regrets right before death. And as I came across this, I said, I want to stop thinking about what do I want to accomplish in my life, but I want to think about how do I want to feel at the moment of death? Because if I'm clear about the emotions that I want to feel, and the only thing that will matter in that moment, in that present moment, is how I feel, and identify those emotions, I can start living those emotions today. And if I live those emotions every single day, by definition, I will have lived the life creating the feelings that I want to have versus the accomplishments. And so I started, I'm just going to go quickly through different things that I did. There's this thing called Lifebook, where it's a 360 view of your life. And you look in a lot of detail at your health, your fitness, your emotional situation, character, your relationships, how you parent, your social, your career. And you look at what are the beliefs that you currently have? What are the beliefs that you want to have? What's your vision? Why? And start to develop plans. And this just made me realize that so often, so many people are just kind of flying blind in their lives, very focused in what they want to do with their career, but no clear direction on how the whole system should look. Um, I talked a little bit about the Wim Hof method. For me, since I started, I haven't gotten a cold, and I realized that the body has a huge amount of innate mechanisms that optimize health and well-being that are just dormant in our habits and our practices, in the way we live life. I even start to do something called SOMA breath, which is intermittent hypoxic training. And it was really interesting that I think 2 years ago, or it was last year, where these guys got a Nobel Prize for their research in how oxygen restriction can be applied. And this, I believe, is also really relevant right now in COVID that actually affects, you can optimize the oxygen in your body by how you breathe in very dramatic ways. And I'll talk about what I did in Kilimanjaro as putting this to the test. So the body can heal itself in many ways if we get out of the way and we start to do things that help it heal. I was never a gym freak. I discovered this thing called super slow training, where essentially um, um, 1 or 2 times a week, 5 machines. It's about 12 to 15 minutes, and it's the most amazing type of strength training that you can do. And when you're 50, getting really strong is absolutely, absolutely critical, because it's a lot of longevity markers. And one of the leading, at least in the U.S., causes of death in older than 65 is trauma from falling down. So I then did another program called Wild Fix, which was about nutrition, sort of a elimination diet, behavioral psychology and education. I ended up losing 9 pounds or 9 kilos, which I thought I needed maybe 2 kilos to lose. And suddenly I went down to my weight and my waist size of my 30s. And I was like, just amazed when I heard the guy say that 95% of body shape is nutrition. I was just like, I find that hard to believe, but it's true. Another thing that happens when you get a little bit older is you start to say, "Oh, my brain, is not working." I go to a dinner and I don't remember names as well. And there's this guy Jim Quick that has these amazing training programs, and it just made me realize that education does not even take into consideration how information gets deposited in the brain. I was really lousy with names. And then at one event that I went to, actually where I met Michael, within 24 hours, I had memorized the names of 70 or 80 people in the room without really making it a really conscious effort. I just suddenly switched on this app that helps me remember things better as a tool. And then more into the brain stuff is how our brain is really a meaning-making machine. And the images and the words that you repeat and what your inner dialogue and what you tell yourself ends up creating. If we go back to the how emotions are made, if you take on a victim role, you just see victim all over the place. So there is an ability to re-script your inner dialogue in pretty fundamental ways. Robin Sharma, in a more professional context, gets into mindset reboots. And I decided that, okay, after about a year and a half of exploration, I'm going to put this to the test. And with a group of Wim Hof people, we decided that we're going to try to summit Kilimanjaro in 48 hours. Now, usually the route that we take, you need 5 days to do it, and the success rate is about 50%. So there we weren't really challenged so much by the cold, even though it was cold, but the altitude. We're going to go up very fast, and we're not going to give the body enough time to get used to the altitude. So did a lot of training and preparation. You see us there with our mouths taped, as we did this weekend in Switzerland, just walking in the cold, which is oxygen restriction, getting the body used to less oxygen as altitude simulation to improve the synthesis of oxygen when you have less oxygen around. And then we did different strength training, endurance, a lot of mindset, and a lot of team building. So, we started our trek. We were 13 folks, 12 guys, and this very, amazing woman, Natalia, that came along with us. When you start the bottom part of Kilimanjaro, it's this amazing, jungle. As you start to go a little bit further up, it sort of almost turns into Scotland. And after about 9 hours of hiking, we'd gone up 2,000 kilometers, 20 kilometers of walking. And at that point, it was high, but not that bad. So everybody was feeling great and doing great. That night we slept, and then we started the Alpine Desert, which is here at about 4,000, where you start to feel the altitude. And there you can see I've got a little oximeter. We were constantly measuring our oxygen saturation, and every 20 minutes or half an hour, we'd be doing breathing techniques to, come up from 76% oxygen back up to 95, 96, 98, or 100. And that was just critical to maintain the pace. And then this is getting to Kibo Hut, where we could really feel the altitude. So, we had basically, in 28 hours in, we had trekked 30 kilometers, almost 3,000 meters of altitude. That night, nobody slept because we were going to leave very early in the morning. So we started our 2 a.m. departure. So up to this point, we had slept about 4 hours with all this, physical effort. Amazing sunrise, and we start to hit the crater. And again, everybody feeling great. You could just, even though it was cold, the sun was quite hot on the skin. But here, the pace had to be very slow. It's kind of like step, step, deep breath, step. And here we're getting close to the summit, and then something very strange happened at this point, which is the final stretch. You could see the summit sign there. And I was just, after an hour and a half of this, like hitting my physiological limit, I said, enough of this shit. And I just started to repeat these affirmations in my head. And I started to say what I wanted to leave on the mountain and what I wanted to take from the mountain with me. Started to breathe really heavily. And suddenly I got switched on. And I didn't run, but I could have run to the top. And, we ended up being at the top of Kilimanjaro dancing. You're supposed to be there 15 minutes. We were there for about 45. And it was just an unbelievable experience. Now, it was not all easy. On the way down, we had a couple storms. There were 3 people that didn't train well, so we had to take them down on stretchers. Everybody was fine. But in the end, after all of this sort of journey, I realized, wow, what we're capable of accomplishing is amazing when we have the right belief systems and the right mindsets. So I don't know if I've turned back the clock or not, but how I feel is what really matters to me. And I'm consciously creating that feeling, and that feeling then becomes a reality. So sort of key takeaways from my journey. You have to question everything, because I don't think anything is real. You create your own reality, that makes it real, but there's nothing objectively out there that you cannot interpret it in different ways, and that you can upgrade any aspect of your life. And it really is the simple belief systems and habits that help, and it's small things every day. So it's not about doing massive things, but it's little things every day that put you on that path, and that it really is a lifestyle change. So just a couple quick recommendations here. This exercise of reverse engineering from death is amazing, because if you start to think about how you want to feel, you could really, it's a great lens to look at everything else. Morning routine, the first hour of the day, give it to yourself. And that's when I do a lot of the different practices, journaling, meditation, breath work. If you're going to embark on a journey like this, fitness and nutrition is an amazing place to start, because you see the results quickly. You can control a lot, and it starts to make you feel a lot better. And there's a lot of great thought leaders out there that are great to follow and that inspire. So I know it's been a lot of content. So I went a little bit longer. Let me stop the screen share. And see any thoughts or comments.
So have you figured out what you're willing to die for yet?
Life.
So let me reframe it. Given all the problems of the world today, especially with young kids, and there's been this unspoken of covenant where the idea is you get the planet, you take care of it, and you give it to the next generation in better shape than when you got it. And that's been true for thousands of years, arguably until very recently. And so given all the problems of the world today, if you could only solve one problem in exchange for your life, what would that be?
Mindset shift for humanity. That we can create a very different reality if we understand that we have that power.
Well, and that different reality comes with a mindset shift.
Exactly.
And so the interesting thing is that if you look at the topic before that we're talking about, you know, the talks before you, those were more inner journey processes. Ultimately, all roads lead to Rome, but they're more kind of inner, you know, this whole Ramana Maharishi, the Eastern approach of, you know, kind of what kind of looking at the inner work and exploring kind of the outer. And the approach that you took, once, you know, things weren't going the way you were planning with the company, you went kind of and learned, you took all of these skills, learned all of these things, but then still, you know, part of the conversation we had before was that metaphysically, things kind of, reality kept whacking on you a little bit in terms of the heart problem and all of these other things. And so, ultimately, it is about this shift. And then
it is
spreading it out globally.
Exactly.
And so
I mean,
with that, and the summary of, I think, of the teachers that they had mentioned, and I think what your answer for that was, is how do we get everyone on the planet to live in harmony, you know, from the innate joy of being, rather than the fears, needs, and desires driven by the stories.
Absolutely. And what are my little contributions? And just there's time for another speaker, but my little contributions. One is talking about kids. I did a documentary called Brain Matters on what happens in the brain in the first few years of life. And, you know, we put it out there for free on YouTube. For people to realize that it is in those early years before kids even speak where their brain is built, and what happens in those early years shapes
and early
their
trauma
future.
and early
And
trauma.
early
So
trauma.
the work of Wilhelm Reich and all of this stuff. I don't know if you're
Exactly.
familiar with him, but yeah.
No, not familiar. And then
parenting.
the second thing,
and parenting,
exactly.
the importance of parenting.
Exactly. So that's one thing in terms of a piece of content that is out there. And now I'm working on with a group of guys in see if we can pull it off, but create this amazing Human Potential Institute. That is a place where you can go and learn and focus on leaders and focus on change makers. It's looking like it might be in Austria, but we're in the embryonic stages. So they just asked me to join as co-founder.
There are many out
yesterday.
there already. There are many out there already right now. And so what makes yours different?
Well, I mean, I don't want to step into the time of the next speaker, but happy to have a side
Hey,
conversation.
please feel free. I miss Gino.
Hey, Pep. Long time no see. Are you next?
Yes.
Oh, what's your topic?
It's actually about selling ventilators during this. But
Well,
I'm
if you
not.
learn to breathe right.
If people learn to breathe right, there would be a much less need for ventilators.
Hey, I wanted to
I
ask you
absolutely
really
agree.
fast. Sorry, what was the name of the documentary that you made?
It's Brain Matters. I can post
Brain
the link in.
Matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, would you post that? I'm here with my sister, and her baby has been having like 20 to 30 seizures a day, and next
wow.
week they're going to remove half the brain, and so I've been doing as much research as I can on the early
Wow.
development of the brain. So if there's anything in there that would be helpful, I'm just in a rabbit hole right now, just on everything. So yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Appreciate that.
So what's the name of the Leadership Institute again? Sorry, Stephen.
No, I mean, we're in the real early stages of it, and I think we're going to call it Beyond. And we're right now just working through what the differentiation is. I mean, the quick version, because again, Pep, I want to be respectful of your time, is really just the whole idea of tapping the potential that we all have neurologically and physiologically. So we all have these capabilities. They're just not developed and trained. And once you become aware of those, and that it does, span a mind, body, soul. So there's a lot of depth of inner work and connecting with your inner purpose and understanding that as the core driver. But it's think about it this way. The idea is that it's for a place almost for people that might be one step away from being open to traditional personal development work. And it's trying to get them into this from a sort of performance potential perspective, and a little bit like a Trojan horse, and then realize that once you get in this, your world shifts and your world changes.